What if everything we've been told about humanity's greatest monument is wrong? What if the massive stone structure rising from the Giza Plateau was not built by Bronze Age Egyptians with copper tools and wooden ramps, but by a civilization so ancient that even Egypt itself had forgotten who they were? Tonight, we step into the shadows of history's most enduring mystery. We'll examine evidence that challenges every textbook, every museum plaque, every accepted timeline. From painted hieroglyphs that may be Victorian forgeries, to mathematical constants encoded in stone, to chambers that hum with Earth's own frequency, the Great Pyramid refuses to surrender its secrets to the neat categories of conventional archaeology. Welcome to Whispered Empires, where we explore the forgotten voices of civilizations that time has tried to erase. If these kinds of stories help you drift into rest, or if they spark your curiosity about what lies beneath the surface of accepted history, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to know. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from right now and what time it is where you are. Your presence here, across time zones and continents, reminds us that mystery is a language we all speak. So let the world grow quiet around you. Let the familiar certainties soften and blur. Because tonight, we return to Giza, not as tourists following the approved path, but as seekers following a question that will not rest. Who truly built the Great Pyramid? And when? Night settles over the Giza Plateau like a held breath. The desert, scorched and restless by day, now cools into stillness. The air grows dense, almost tactile, as if you could reach out and feel time itself pressing down from above. And there, rising from the sand like a frozen wave of stone, stands the Great Pyramid, 146 meters of limestone and granite, too vast to comprehend, too precise to seem the work of human hands. In this hour between day and night, when the last tourists have departed and the floodlights have not yet ignited, the monument exists in its purest state. Silent, ancient, patient. It does not speak, but it watches. It has watched the rise and fall of dynasties, the birth and death of religions, the slow march of empires across the sand. It was old when Rome was young. It was ancient when the Bible was written. And if the whispers are true, if the evidence we're about to explore holds weight, it was already a mystery when the pharaohs first gazed upon it, wondering who had built such a thing. Stand at its base, if only in your mind. Place your hand against the cool stone. Each block weighs as much as a car, fitted so precisely against its neighbors that even now, after millennia of earthquakes and weathering, you cannot slide a knife blade between them. The corners align to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that modern architects struggle to match. The base is level to within centimeters across 13 acres. This is not primitive architecture. This is not the work of a civilization learning to build. This is perfection achieved on the first attempt. And that perfection is the first thread we must pull to unravel the official story. For more than 2 centuries, the story we've been told has remained remarkably consistent. It goes like this. Around 2580 BC, during Egypt's 4th dynasty, Pharaoh Khufu, whom the Greeks later called Cheops, ordered the construction of his tomb. This was to be no ordinary burial place. It would be a monument to his divine power, securing his passage into the afterlife and cementing his name in eternity. Royal architects drew plans. Tens of thousands of workers were mobilized, perhaps as many as 100,000 during peak construction seasons. The logistics sound almost superhuman, but the textbooks assure us they were merely human. Limestone was quarried from nearby Tura, just across the Nile. Granite, harder and more precious, was floated down from Aswan, 800 kilometers to the south. Workers, not slaves, modern Egyptology insists, but paid laborers, hauled these massive blocks using copper tools, wooden sledges and muscle. They built ramps, perhaps spiraling around the structure as it grew, perhaps running straight out into the desert for a mile or more. Over the course of approximately 20 years, they placed 2.3 million stone blocks. Some weigh 2.5 tons. Others, particularly the granite beams in the king's chamber, weigh 80 tons. When the work was finished, the pyramid stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth, a title it would hold for nearly 4,000 years. Inside, narrow passages led to 3 main chambers, an unfinished subterranean room cut into the bedrock, the misnamed Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber, where Khufu's body was supposedly laid to rest in a granite sarcophagus. Above the King's Chamber, 5 so-called relieving chambers distributed the pyramid's immense weight, protecting the burial room from collapse. This is the story you'll find in every museum, every textbook, every documentary. It is neat, linear, and reassuring. It tells us that human ingenuity and determination can achieve the impossible. It tells us that progress is a ladder, and that we stand at the top, looking down at our primitive ancestors with a mixture of admiration and condescension. But there's a problem with this story. The more closely we examine it, the more it begins to fracture. Let's pause on the numbers because numbers don't lie, even when the stories around them do. 2.3 million blocks. 20 years of construction. That's 115,000 blocks per year. Divided by 365 days, that's 315 blocks per day. Working a 10-hour day, that's more than 31 blocks per hour. One block every 2 minutes, day and night, for 2 decades without pause. Each of these blocks had to be quarried, shaped, transported, lifted, and set with near-perfect precision. The facing stones, most now lost to medieval construction projects in Cairo, were cut so accurately that their surfaces varied by less than a millimeter. The granite beams above the king's chamber fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, weighing dozens of tons each, positioned 43 meters above ground level. Even with modern cranes, laser levels, and computer-aided design, no construction project of comparable scale has achieved such speed and precision. The Hoover Dam, a triumph of 20th-century engineering, took 5 years and required 21,000 workers. It contains about 2.6 million cubic meters of concrete. Impressive, but poured, not individually placed and fitted with surgical accuracy. And this is where skepticism begins to creep in like water through cracks in stone. Because if we're honest, truly honest, the timeline doesn't merely seem ambitious. It seems physically impossible. But impossible by whose standards? By the standards of a Bronze Age culture? Absolutely. By the standards of a civilization we don't yet understand, one that existed before recorded history began? That's the question that refuses to be silenced. Every origin story needs a storyteller, and for the Great Pyramid, that storyteller was Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BC, roughly 2,000 years after Khufu supposedly built the monument. Herodotus did not witness the construction. He did not interview the architects. He spoke to Egyptian priests and guides who themselves were repeating stories passed down through generations, stories that had already fossilized into legend. And what did these stories tell him? They spoke of massive ramps and 100,000 workers laboring in 3-month shifts. They described 20 years of effort. They claimed that Khufu was so tyrannical, so obsessed with his tomb, that he closed the temples and forced the entire nation into servitude. But Herodotus also recorded other details that modern historians quietly ignore. He wrote of machines used to lift the stones, machines made of short planks of wood. He mentioned magic and divine intervention. He described things that sounded less like engineering and more like mythology. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The entire modern understanding of the Great Pyramid's construction rests on Herodotus's second-hand accounts, filtered through 2 millennia of cultural translation, and cherry-picked to fit a narrative that makes sense to us. There are no contemporary Egyptian records describing the pyramid's construction. No papyrus scrolls detailing the workforce. No wall paintings showing the methods. Even Khufu himself is strangely absent from the archaeological record. His only known statue is a tiny figurine barely 10 centimeters tall, the smallest representation of any major pharaoh. For a king who supposedly built the largest monument in human history, his legacy is astonishingly quiet. What if Herodotus wasn't recording history? What if he was recording a memory already ancient in his time, a memory of something even the Egyptians themselves no longer fully understood? The official story of the Great Pyramid stands on surprisingly shaky ground, but it stands nonetheless, reinforced by repetition, by institutional authority, by the sheer weight of centuries of acceptance. Textbooks repeat it. Tour guides recite it. Museums enshrine it. And with each repetition, it hardens into fact, even as the evidence supporting it remains thin, circumstantial, and in some cases deeply questionable. But beneath this certainty, doubt stirs like sand disturbed by wind. If Khufu built the pyramid, where is his tomb? The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty and always has been. No mummy, no treasures, no grave goods. Not even the residue of mummification. The chamber is as blank as a page waiting to be written on. If Bronze Age Egyptians possessed the technology to achieve such precision, where are the tools? Where are the prototypes? Where are the earlier attempts that show the learning curve? Every technology leaves a trail. Rough drafts, failed experiments, incremental improvements. But the Great Pyramid appears fully formed, as if perfection arrived without practice. And if this was truly a tomb built in the 4th dynasty, why is it alone in its sophistication? The pyramids that came after, Khafre's, Menkaur's and all the rest, are smaller, less precise, less enduring. Technology should improve over time, not decline. Yet here the oldest is also the best. The official story asks us to believe that a Bronze Age civilization, armed with copper chisels and wooden ramps, achieved a level of precision and scale that we could barely replicate today. And then, having done so, they forgot how. Perhaps it's time to consider another possibility. Perhaps the story we've been told is not history, but inheritance. Egypt claiming credit for something it found, something it restored, something built by hands that vanished long before the first pharaoh wore a crown. And if that's true, then the real mystery isn't how the pyramid was built. It's who built it, and when. The year is 1837, and Egypt is awash with treasure hunters, glory seekers, and men desperate to carve their names into history. Among them, none is more determined or more reckless than Colonel Richard William Howard Vyse, a British military officer with dwindling funds and mounting obsession. Vyse had come to Giza expecting to make the discovery of the century. Instead, he found himself outmaneuvered by a younger, more skilled explorer named Giovanni Caviglia, who had already secured the support of local authorities and begun mapping the pyramid's interior passages. Frustrated and facing financial ruin, Vyse did what desperate men often do. He spent money he didn't have, hired more workers than he could afford, and when persuasion failed, he resorted to force. Literally. Vyse brought gunpowder to Giza. Where other explorers had carefully probed and measured, Vyse blasted. Where ancient stone had stood sealed for millennia, he dynamited passageways and shattered granite. His Egyptian workers protested, horrified at the desecration, but Vyse pressed on. He was running out of time, out of money, and out of patience. For months he found nothing. No treasures, no inscriptions, no proof that Khufu had ever touched this place. His reputation among fellow explorers crumbled. His debts mounted. The pyramid, it seemed, would give him nothing. And then, in March of 1837, his luck changed, or so he claimed. While tunneling upward from the king's chamber, Vyse's team breached a series of narrow cavities now known as the relieving chambers. These were small spaces, dark and dusty, designed to distribute the pyramid's massive weight and prevent the ceiling from collapsing. On the granite beams of the uppermost chamber, the one now called Campbell's Chamber, Vyse's men reported seeing faint markings. Red paint. Rough, scattered hieroglyphs. And among them, the most precious find of all, a cartouche, an oval frame enclosing a royal name. Khunem Khufu. The birth name of Pharaoh Khufu. Vyse announced his discovery with triumph. Here at last was the proof everyone had been searching for, the builder's signature painted by ancient hands inside the very heart of the monument. Newspapers across Europe celebrated the find. The Great Pyramid finally had an author. But from the beginning, something about those markings felt wrong. Unlike the carved hieroglyphs found in other royal tombs, deep, precise, permanent, these marks were painted in ochre, crude and hasty, as if applied by someone in a hurry. Some symbols overlapped the quarry marks used by workers to align the blocks, meaning the paint had been applied after the stones were set. Others contained spelling errors, mistakes no trained scribe would make, but identical to errors in a recently published hieroglyphic reference book that Vyse owned and cited in his own notes. Even more suspiciously, there was no mention of these markings in the field notes of Vyse's assistants, the men who first entered the chamber. The cartouche appeared only in Vyse's later journal entries, written after he had dismissed or fallen out with several key members of his team. A pattern began to emerge, not of discovery but of desperation. Modern analysis has not been kind to Vyse's discovery. When researchers examine high-resolution photographs and chemical samples from the chamber, the red paint tells a troubling story. The pigment lacks the crystallization and mineral breakdown expected of 4,000-year-old ochre. Under magnification, it appears disturbingly fresh, as if applied within the last 2 centuries rather than the last 4 millennia. Brush fibers have been found embedded in the paint, a technique unknown to ancient Egyptian artisans who used reed pens or applied color with their fingers. When compared to verified Old Kingdom pigments from other sites, Vyse markings show subtle chemical differences. Specifically, they contain traces of industrial iron oxide, a compound consistent with 19th-century paint sources but not with natural ochre ground by ancient hands. Even the hieroglyphs themselves betray their likely origins. The cartouche reads Khunem Khufu, but the symbol used for Khufu includes a sign that didn't exist in the 4th dynasty. It's an error copied directly from Sir John Gardner Wilkinson's Materia Hieroglyphica, published just a few years before Vyse's expedition, a book Vyse not only owned but referenced repeatedly in his own writings. To believe the markings are genuine, we must believe that ancient scribes made the exact same spelling mistakes as a 19th-century British scholar, using pigment that somehow remained chemically fresh for millennia. applied with a technique they never used in a style they never practiced. Or we can consider the simpler explanation. A desperate man running out of time and money painted hieroglyphs in the dark to save his reputation. If Weiss did forge the hieroglyphs, and the evidence leans heavily in that direction, then the implications are staggering. The entire chronology of the Great Pyramid rests on those painted marks. Without them, there is no physical evidence linking the structure to Khufu. No inscriptions on the exterior walls. No text describing its construction. No artifacts bearing the pharaoh's seal. The pyramid becomes undated, untethered from the 4th dynasty, floating free in time. It could have been built in 2500 BC as the textbooks claim. Or it could have been built in 10,000 BC before writing, before Egypt, before recorded history began. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, mainstream Egyptology refuses to re-examine Weiss's claims. The reason is simple: too much depends on them. Entire academic careers have been built on the assumption that Khufu commissioned the pyramid. Museum exhibits, documentary films, educational curricula, all rely on the painted cartouche as their anchor. To admit that Weiss may have forged the evidence would not merely embarrass a long-dead explorer. It would unravel the foundational narrative of ancient Egypt. It would force scholars to admit that we don't actually know who built the pyramid or when or how. And that admission would open a door that archaeology has spent 2 centuries trying to keep closed. The irony is almost poetic. In trying to give the pyramid a voice, Weiss may have silenced it forever. Because now, whenever someone questions the official timeline, defenders can point to the painted cartouche and declare the case closed. Never mind the chemical evidence. Never mind the spelling errors. Never mind the suspicious timing of the discovery. The name is there and that's all that matters. But the stones themselves remain silent on the matter. They bear no inscriptions praising Khufu's glory. They record no dates, no dynasties, no pharaohs. They speak only in the language of geometry, precision, and impossible scale. A language that predates hieroglyphs, predates Egypt, predates everything we think we know about the rise of civilization. If we strip away Weiss's questionable discovery, what are we left with? A monument of unknown age, built by unknown hands, using unknown methods for unknown purposes. And perhaps that's closer to the truth than any story we've been told. The painted lie gave us certainty. But certainty, it turns out, is not the same as truth. Stone is stubborn. It does not age like wood, which rings can count. It does not decay like bone, which carbon can date. It simply endures, silent and immovable, holding its secrets across millennia. For archaeologists trying to determine when the Great Pyramid was built, this presents an almost insurmountable challenge. The limestone blocks that form its core contain no organic material, no biological clock ticking down through the centuries. They are, for all practical purposes, timeless. So if the stone itself won't speak, archaeologists must turn to what surrounds it. The mortar between the blocks, the fragments of organic material embedded in construction debris, the charcoal from ancient fires. These remnants can be carbon dated, their radioactive decay measured to estimate age. But even here, the pyramid resists easy answers. In 1984, a team led by Egyptologist Mark Lehner undertook the most comprehensive radiocarbon study ever attempted on the pyramid's mortar. The Edgar Cayce Foundation funded the project and expectations were high. Finally, they believed science would confirm what history had long claimed, that the pyramid was built during Khufu's reign, around 2500 BC. The results seemed at first to support this. Many samples clustered around 2500 BC, give or take a few centuries. The discovery was hailed as vindication. The Great Pyramid had been scientifically dated. But a closer look at the data told a more complicated story. The problem with the 1984 study wasn't what it found, it was what it couldn't explain. Some mortar samples dated precisely to Khufu's era as expected. But others dated to 3000 BC, centuries before the 4th dynasty even existed. Still others came back younger than Khufu, suggesting construction or repair work during later periods. The spread was enormous, as much as 1,000 years between the oldest and youngest samples. The team explained away these discrepancies as the old wood problem, the idea that ancient Egyptians might have burned wood from trees that had been dead for centuries, or reused organic materials from earlier structures. It's a plausible explanation, and it allowed the study's conclusions to stand. But it also reveals a fundamental weakness in the dating method. If we assume the pyramids date in advance, then any results that match are correct, and any that don't are contamination or error. The logic becomes circular. We date the pyramid to prove it was built when we already believe it was built. Worse still, what the study actually measured was not the construction date of the pyramid, but the age of the mortar, and mortar can be added, repaired, or replaced long after the original stones were laid. Over 4,000 years, the pyramid has been patched and restored countless times by pharaohs, priests, and modern preservationists. What the radiocarbon samples may be telling us is not when the pyramid was built, but when it was last repaired. Then, in 2020, everything shifted again. A curatorial assistant at the University of Aberdeen, Abir Eladini, was cataloging old donations when she stumbled upon a small cigar box wrapped in a 1946 newspaper. Inside lay a splinter of cedar wood, dark and dry, carved into a rod-like shape. A faded label read, "From the Great Pyramid. Dixon Relics." This was no ordinary artifact. In 1872, British engineer Wayneman Dixon had discovered 3 small objects hidden in one of the pyramid's narrow shafts: a granite ball, a bronze hook, and this cedar fragment. The first 2 objects eventually made their way to the British Museum. But the wood, the most scientifically valuable piece, had been lost for nearly 150 years. When Eladini sent it for radiocarbon dating, the results stunned everyone. 3510 to 3340 BC. That places the wood 500 to 800 years before Khufu's reign, before the 4th dynasty, before the first recognized pharaohs of a unified Egypt. Mainstream Egyptologists quickly offered explanations. Perhaps the cedar tree lived for centuries before being cut. Perhaps the wood was old when it was used. Perhaps it's contamination. All of these are theoretically possible. But here's the uncomfortable fact. This is the only direct organic artifact ever found inside the structural core of the Great Pyramid. And it predates the supposed builder by half a millennium. If we take the evidence at face value, the pyramid's internal components existed before Khufu was born. But carbon dating isn't the only clock we can read. The stones themselves carry another kind of timestamp, one written not in isotopes but in erosion. When geologist Robert Schoch first examined the Sphinx enclosure in the 1990s, he noticed something that didn't fit the accepted timeline. The limestone walls showed deep, vertical channels, weathering patterns consistent with heavy rainfall, not wind-blown sand. Egypt has been a desert for thousands of years. The kind of rainfall needed to carve those channels ended around 5000 BC, when the Sahara transformed from savanna to sand. If the Sphinx enclosure was carved during the Old Kingdom, as Egyptologists claim, it should show horizontal weathering from wind and sand. Instead, it shows vertical erosion from water. The same weathering patterns appear at the base of the Great Pyramid. Sediment cores from the Nile Valley confirm that the region was far wetter between 10,000 and 5000 BC. If the pyramid's lower courses show water erosion, they could date to that wetter period, thousands of years before the pharaohs. Mainstream geologists have offered alternative explanations, pointing to groundwater seepage or rare flash floods. But the patterns persist, and the questions they raise will not be easily dismissed. What if the pyramid didn't weather in Egypt's desert climate? What if it was built when the Sahara was still green? Perhaps the truth is not simple. Perhaps the Great Pyramid is not a singular creation from a single era, but a palimpsest, a manuscript written over, erased and written over again. Imagine an ancient core, built in an age we've forgotten, when the Sahara was still green and civilizations whose names we do not know raised monuments to purposes we cannot fathom. Imagine that core surviving a cataclysm, a flood, a climate shift, a collapse of the world order. Then, thousands of years later, a new people arrive. The Egyptians. They find the structure already standing, weathered but intact, its builders long vanished. They restore it. They add facing stones and causeways. They carve out internal chambers and perhaps rename it as their own. Khufu doesn't build the pyramid. He inherits it, refurbishes it, and claims it. This would explain the contradictions. Why the oldest samples predate Egypt. Why some mortar dates to later periods. Why the precision seems to decline in subsequent pyramids. Because they were copying something they didn't fully understand, working from a blueprint that was already ancient when they found it. The pyramid, in this view, belongs not to one age but to many. Its foundation may be 10,000 years old. Its repairs may span millennia. It is a monument to continuity, not creation, a testament to the stubborn human urge to preserve what we cannot replicate. And if that's true, then the real builders left no names, no inscriptions, no record. They left only the work itself, anonymous and eternal, waiting for us to ask the right questions. Time refuses to speak. But perhaps silence is its own answer. Let's return to the numbers, because sometimes the most elegant way to expose a lie is simply to count. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. The accepted construction timeline is 20 years. Do the arithmetic and the problem becomes immediately clear. That's 115,000 blocks per year or 315 blocks per day, assuming work never stopped. Not for floods, not for festivals, not for the death of workers or the failure of tools. Divide those daily blocks across a 10-hour workday, and you arrive at 31.5 blocks per hour. That's one block every 114 seconds. Less than 2 minutes to quarry a multi-ton block of limestone or granite, transport it from the quarry, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, shape it to precision tolerances, haul it up the side of a growing pyramid, and set it in place with joints so tight that a human hair won't fit between them. Less than 2 minutes. For 20 years. Without stopping. Even if we're generous and assume the Egyptians worked longer days, employed massive crews and possessed organizational genius beyond anything seen before or since, the timeline strains credulity. Modern construction projects with hydraulic cranes, computer-aided design and steel tools cannot match this pace. The Hoover Dam, one of the 20th century's engineering marvels, took 5 years to build with 21,000 workers and killed 96 men in the process. It contains roughly 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete. Impressive, but poured as liquid, not placed as individual fitted stones weighing tons each. The Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, took 6 years and required cutting-edge technology unavailable even a decade before its construction. Yet we're asked to believe that Bronze Age workers with copper chisels and wooden sledges accomplished something more ambitious in the same time frame? The mathematics don't merely suggest difficulty. They suggest impossibility. Now let's talk about tools, because tools tell us what a civilization can and cannot do. Ancient Egypt was a Bronze Age culture. Their hardest metal was copper, sometimes alloyed with tin or arsenic to create bronze. Copper is soft. It ranks a 3 on the Mohs hardness scale, which measures a material's resistance to scratching. Limestone, the pyramid's primary building material, ranks between 3 and 4 on that same scale. Copper can cut limestone, though slowly, with significant tool wear. Experimental archaeologists have demonstrated this, though it's laborious work requiring constant sharpening and tool replacement. But here's where the official story encounters a harder problem. Literally. The granite used in the king's chamber, the relieving chambers above it, and various other internal structures ranks between 6 and 7 on the Mohs scale. It's more than twice as hard as copper. When modern experimenters try to cut granite with copper tools, the copper dulls, bends and fails within minutes. The stone remains virtually unmarked. In laboratory tests, copper chisels barely scratch granite's surface. To shape even a single one of the 80-ton granite beams in the king's chamber using Bronze Age tools would require thousands of chisels, constant reforging, and months or even years of labor per block. Multiply that by the hundreds of granite blocks used throughout the pyramid, and you're looking at an industrial-scale operation requiring resources and time that dwarf even the most generous estimates. Some archaeologists suggest that the Egyptians used dolerite pounding stones, harder rocks used to chip away at granite surfaces. And it's true that dolerite, ranking around 7 on the Mohs scale, can damage granite. But pounding creates rough, irregular surfaces. It doesn't explain the precision we see in the pyramid's granite work. And it certainly doesn't explain the drill marks. Inside the pyramid, particularly in the granite sections, something peculiar appears when you look closely. Not with the naked eye but with precision instruments and magnification. Circular grooves. Spiral striations. Tool marks that descend into the stone in perfect helical patterns, as if created by a rotating drill bit. Engineer Christopher Dunn, a precision manufacturing expert, studied these marks extensively. He measured the pitch, the distance the tool advanced with each rotation. What he found was astonishing. The drill marks showed a feed rate of 0.1 inches per revolution. That means the cutting tool was advancing 1/10 of an inch into solid granite with every turn. To achieve this with hand tools is essentially impossible. Even with modern diamond-tipped drill bits spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute under hydraulic pressure, achieving such a feed rate in granite requires specialized industrial equipment. Dunn created computer models of the marks, comparing them to modern machining signatures. The patterns matched those produced by rotary tools operating at high speeds with consistent, mechanized pressure. The kind of pressure human hands simply cannot maintain. Some Egyptologists argue that these marks were made by copper tubes spun with sand as an abrasive. In theory, sand crystals, some of which contain quartz harder than granite, could grind through stone. But experimental attempts to replicate this technique have produced rough, irregular grooves nothing like the precision spiral marks found in the pyramid. The marks in the granite look less like the work of ancient craftsmen and more like the output of a machine shop. But how could a Bronze Age civilization possess such technology? And if they did, where did it go? Why do we find no other examples of this advanced drilling technique anywhere else in Egypt? Unless, of course, the pyramid wasn't built by Bronze Age Egyptians at all. Let's turn to another impossibility: transportation. The granite blocks used in the king's chamber came from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers south of Giza. Some of these blocks weigh 80 tons, 160,000 pounds. They had to be quarried, moved to the Nile, loaded onto boats, floated downstream, unloaded, transported across the desert, and lifted more than 40 meters into the air to their final positions. The Nile provided a natural transportation corridor, and Egyptologists have long suggested that wooden barges carried the granite downstream. But physics presents a problem. The buoyancy limit of a wooden barge depends on its size and the density of the wood. Ancient Egyptian boats were typically made from acacia or cedar, both of which have specific densities that determine how much weight they can carry before sinking. Naval engineers have calculated that a barge large enough to carry an 80-ton block would need to be enormous, perhaps 30 meters long and 15 meters wide, built from massive timbers, and engineered to distribute weight evenly. Even then, loading and unloading such a cargo without modern cranes would be extraordinarily dangerous and difficult. In the 1990s, researchers attempted to recreate such a barge using ancient techniques and materials. When they loaded it with 60 tons of stone, less than the heaviest pyramid blocks, the vessel cracked under the strain and began taking on water. The experiment ended before the barge sank completely, but the message was clear: transporting such weights by river was far more difficult than the textbooks suggest. And even if they managed to get the granite to Giza, the next challenge loomed: moving it from the riverbank to the pyramid and lifting it into position. Some theories propose wooden rollers or sledges lubricated with water to reduce friction. Others suggest elaborate ramp systems spiraling around the pyramid or extending for miles into the desert. But none of these theories have been convincingly demonstrated at scale. The 1978 Japanese experiment, funded by Nippon Television, attempted to build a small-scale pyramid using only ancient Egyptian tools and methods. The team quickly ran into trouble. Copper chisels failed. Ropes snapped. Sledges bogged down in sand even with water lubrication. After weeks of effort, they managed to raise their pyramid to only 10 meters, half their target height, before resorting to modern steel tools and diesel cranes. If a team of engineers with modern knowledge, unlimited funding, and the ability to call for help couldn't replicate the pyramid's construction using ancient methods, how did Bronze Age workers accomplish it? The answer, again, suggests that something is missing from our understanding. Either the ancient Egyptians possessed technology we haven't yet discovered, or the pyramid wasn't built by ancient Egyptians at all. Perhaps the most persistent theory, and the one most often cited by defenders of the orthodox timeline, is the ramp hypothesis. The idea is simple: as the pyramid grew, workers built ramps of mud brick or rubble, allowing them to drag the blocks up to increasingly higher levels. Once construction finished, the ramps were dismantled and the material removed. It sounds plausible until you run the numbers. To maintain a reasonable incline, say 110, which means rising 1 meter for every 10 meters of horizontal distance, the ramp would need to be extraordinarily long as the pyramid grew taller. By the time workers reached the pyramid's peak at 146 meters, the ramp would extend more than 1,460 meters into the desert. And it would need to be wide enough for teams of workers to haul massive stones up and down simultaneously. The volume of material required for such a ramp would exceed the volume of the pyramid itself. Millions of tons of mud brick, rubble, and fill dirt would need to be quarried, transported, shaped, and then completely removed once construction finished. Yet not a trace of such a ramp survives. No foundations, no rubble piles, no secondary quarries where the ramp material might have been sourced. The desert around Giza shows no evidence of the massive earthworks such a project would require. Alternative theories propose spiral ramps wrapping around the pyramid's exterior, or internal ramps built into the structure itself. But these theories face their own problems. An external spiral ramp would obscure the pyramid's corners, making precise alignment impossible. Internal ramps would require enormous voids within the structure, which ground-penetrating radar has not detected. The ramp theory remains the most popular explanation not because the evidence supports it, but because no one has proposed a better alternative that doesn't invoke lost technology or forgotten methods. And so we return to the central question. If the tools don't work, if the timeline doesn't fit, if the transportation methods fail, and if the ramps never existed, then how was the Great Pyramid built? The answer increasingly seems to be, we don't know. And perhaps the reason we don't know is because we're looking for the wrong builders in the wrong age, asking the wrong questions about a structure that predates the civilization we've credited with its creation. In 1880, a British surveyor named Flinders Petrie arrived at Giza carrying the finest precision instruments available in the Victorian age. Petrie was a meticulous man, almost obsessively so, known for his exacting standards and refusal to accept sloppy measurement. He had come to Egypt to settle a debate about the pyramid's dimensions once and for all. What he found didn't settle anything. It deepened the mystery. Petrie measured the pyramid's base with painstaking care, checking and rechecking his work. The four sides averaged 230.4 meters in length, but what astonished him wasn't the size, it was the consistency. The difference between the longest and shortest sides was less than 2 centimeters. Less than an inch across a distance of more than 230 meters. To put that in perspective, imagine drawing a perfectly straight line across 2.5 football fields, and being off by less than the width of your thumb. Now imagine doing it 4 times, connecting the lines at perfect right angles, all while working with multi-ton blocks of stone. But Petrie wasn't finished. He measured the base level and found that the pyramid's corners varied in height by less than 1.5 centimeters. Across 13 acres, the foundation was leveled to within half an inch. Modern construction projects, using laser levels, GPS satellites, and computer-aided surveying equipment, rarely achieve such precision. Yet here it was, executed thousands of years ago by people who supposedly had nothing more sophisticated than plumb bobs and string. Petrie's measurements didn't stop there. He calculated the pyramid's orientation to true north and found a deviation of only 3 arc minutes and 6 arc seconds. That's less than 1/20th of a degree. Even with modern astronomical instruments, achieving such alignment requires careful observation and precise calculation. The ancient Egyptians would have needed to track the stars over multiple nights, correct for atmospheric refraction, and understand the concept of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the position of celestial north over millennia. The textbooks tell us the Egyptians did all of this by observing the star Thuban in the constellation Draco, which served as the North Pole star in their era. But astronomical calculations show that in 2500 BC, Thuban wasn't precisely aligned with true north, there would have been a slight offset. Yet the pyramid's alignment is more accurate than Thuban's position in that era would allow. It's as if the builders understood true north better than the stars themselves. Move closer to the pyramid's surface, and the precision becomes even more incomprehensible. The casing stones, the smooth limestone blocks that once covered the entire structure, most now removed by medieval builders for use in Cairo's mosques and palaces, were cut with such accuracy that the joints between them measured less than half a millimeter. That's thinner than a sheet of paper. No mortar fills these gaps. The stones simply rest against each other, held in place by their own weight and the perfection of their fit. Even after centuries of earthquakes, temperature fluctuations, and the constant expansion and contraction of stone in the desert heat, these joints remain tighter than most modern construction. Engineers from the French Institute for Research in Engineering and Construction studied the surviving casing stones in the 1990s. They used precision instruments to measure the surface flatness and found tolerances comparable to machined metal. One engineer described it as the accuracy you'd expect from an aircraft wing, applied to millions of tons of rock. How does a civilization without precision measuring tools, without straight edges longer than a few meters, without computer-aided design, achieve such perfection across an entire structure? The answer isn't just that they were skilled. Skill implies human variability, some blocks better than others, some joints tighter, some surfaces flatter. But the pyramid shows systematic precision, as if every block was measured against the same invisible standard, every surface finished to the same tolerance. It suggests not just craftsmanship but methodology. Not just tools but technology. Beneath the visible pyramid lies perhaps its most impressive engineering achievement: the foundation. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic studies have revealed that the pyramid doesn't simply rest on sand and bedrock. Its foundation consists of carefully engineered bedrock terraces, cut into the natural limestone plateau and leveled with extraordinary precision. These terraces interlock with the pyramid's lower courses, creating a stable platform that distributes the structure's immense weight, more than 6 million tons, evenly across the plateau. The engineering is so sophisticated that after 4,500 years, or more if alternative timelines are correct, the pyramid has settled less than half an inch. Compare that to modern buildings. The Millennium Tower in San Francisco, completed in 2009 using cutting-edge engineering, has sunk more than 16 inches in just over a decade. The Leaning Tower of Pisa has tilted dramatically due to foundation settlement. Even the Washington Monument required stabilization work in the 19th century after settling unevenly. Yet the Great Pyramid, vastly older and vastly heavier, stands virtually unchanged. The foundation design also accounts for thermal expansion. Limestone expands and contracts with temperature changes. Over the course of a day, the pyramid's surface can fluctuate by several degrees. Over a year, the variation is even greater. Yet the structure remains stable because its foundation was designed to accommodate this movement, allowing the stones to shift microscopically without compromising the overall integrity. This requires understanding load distribution, material properties, and thermal dynamics, concepts that weren't formally codified in engineering until the 18th and 19th centuries. How did Bronze Age builders anticipate problems that modern engineers solve with advanced mathematics and computer modeling? Step inside the pyramid and the precision continues. The Grand Gallery, a 47-meter-long ascending corridor leading to the King's Chamber, is one of the most architecturally sophisticated spaces in the ancient world. Its corbelled ceiling, where each course of stone projects slightly inward until meeting at the top, is not just beautiful, it's brilliant engineering. The gallery's slope matches the pyramid's outer face angle almost exactly, 26 degrees. This isn't coincidence. The matching angles create harmonic resonance throughout the structure, allowing vibration to travel efficiently through the stone, a feature we'll explore more deeply later. But what's truly remarkable is the precision of the corbelling itself. Each stone projects inward by a calculated amount, creating a ceiling that narrows as it rises. The corbels are so precisely fitted that despite the immense weight pressing down on them, they've remained stable for millennia. Modern architects recognize this technique as a sophisticated solution to the problem of spanning large spaces without using arches or beams. But corbelling requires precise calculation. If the stones project too far, they become unstable, too little, and the space isn't properly enclosed. The ancient builders got it exactly right on their first attempt. There are no practice galleries, no earlier failed experiments. The Grand Gallery appears fully realized, as if the technique was already mastered before construction began. And then there are the tool marks on the walls, or rather, the lack of them. The surfaces are smooth, almost polished, showing none of the rough scraping or pounding marks you'd expect from stone tools. It's as if the granite was cut with precision blades, leaving surfaces that modern masons would be proud to claim. Here's what should trouble anyone willing to look at the evidence objectively. The Great Pyramid is the oldest major pyramid in Egypt. It's also the largest, the most precisely aligned, the most sophisticated in its internal architecture, and the most enduring. Everything that came after was smaller, less precise, and less stable. That's not how technology works. Human innovation moves from crude to refined, from simple to complex, from failure to success. The first airplane didn't break the sound barrier. The first computer didn't fit in your pocket. The first attempt at any technology is almost always the worst, improving through iteration, experimentation, and accumulated knowledge. Yet at Giza, perfection appears first and degrades afterward. The step pyramid at Saqqara, attributed to an earlier pharaoh, is less sophisticated. The pyramids built after Khufu's are smaller and cruder. Even the famous bent pyramid at Dahshur shows signs of structural problems and mid-construction corrections, clear evidence of builders learning as they worked. But the Great Pyramid shows no such learning curve. It's as if the knowledge arrived fully formed, was applied once with perfect execution, and then was gradually forgotten. This inverted trajectory suggests not innovation but inheritance. The Great Pyramid may not be the first Egyptian pyramid. It may be the last of something older, built by a civilization that had long ago perfected the art of large-scale stone construction. The Egyptians who came after attempted to replicate what they saw, but without the knowledge or tools of the original builders, their copies fell short. They inherited a masterpiece but not the mastery that created it. And so the Great Pyramid stands alone, a monument not of beginning but of ending. The last echo of a forgotten age, preserved in stone so perfect that even now, we can barely comprehend how it was achieved. There are some who say that numbers don't lie, that mathematics is the only truly universal language transcending culture and time. If that's true, then the Great Pyramid has been speaking to us for thousands of years. We've simply been too distracted by surface narratives to listen. Let's begin with the simplest and most elegant encoded constant, pi. Pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, is approximately 3.14159. It's an irrational number, meaning its decimal places extend infinitely without repeating. It's fundamental to geometry, appearing in everything from circles to waves to the orbits of planets. The ancient Egyptians, according to their surviving mathematical texts, used a rough approximation of pi, 3.16. That's close but not particularly precise. Yet when you measure the Great Pyramid carefully, something remarkable appears. Take the perimeter of the base, all four sides added together, and divide it by twice the height. The result is 3.1416, accurate to 4 decimal places. That's not an approximation. That's precision that wouldn't be matched in written mathematics until the Greeks, more than 2,000 years later. But here's what makes this truly astonishing. Pi is a property of circles, not rectangles. The pyramid has no curves, no circles in its basic structure. Whoever designed it had to deliberately encode pi into the proportions of a structure made entirely of straight lines and flat planes. Why would they do this? What purpose does it serve? Unless the pyramid was meant to be more than a tomb. Unless it was meant to be a message, a mathematical statement carved in millions of tons of stone. Pi isn't the only mathematical constant hidden in the pyramid's geometry. There's another, even more profound, the golden ratio phi, approximately 1.618. Phi appears throughout nature. It's the ratio that governs the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the proportions of the human body, and the arms of spiral galaxies. It's a number that seems to encode life itself, appearing wherever natural growth and form intersect. Ancient cultures understood phi, though they called it by different names. The Greeks considered it the divine proportion. Renaissance artists like Leonardo da Vinci used it to create visual harmony. Architects have employed it for millennia to design structures that feel balanced and beautiful to the human eye. In the Great Pyramid, phi appears in the relationship between the slant height, the distance from the base to the apex along the face, and half the base length. Divide one by the other and you get 1.618, the golden ratio, precise to 3 decimal places. Again, this isn't coincidence. To encode both pi and phi in the same structure requires deliberate mathematical sophistication. It means the builders understood not just practical geometry, how to make right angles and level surfaces, but theoretical mathematics, the abstract relationships between numbers and forms. The pyramid becomes a kind of geometric sermon, a three-dimensional proof that its creators understood the mathematics governing both circles and growth, infinity and life. And they expressed this understanding not in papyrus that could burn or ink that could fade, but in stone that would endure as long as the earth itself. Now we venture into territory that strains credulity, that seems almost too perfect to be true. Yet the numbers are undeniable. The Great Pyramid's latitude, its position north of the equator, is 29.9792458 degrees. The speed of light in a vacuum is 299,792,458 meters per second. The coordinates match the speed of light to 6 decimal places. Skeptics immediately point out the obvious. The metric system didn't exist in ancient times. The meter was defined in 1791 as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the equator to the North Pole. Ancient Egyptians couldn't have known about meters per second. That's true. But here's what makes this coincidence troubling. Latitude isn't arbitrary. It's a function of the Earth itself, based on the planet's geometry and rotation. The pyramid's location was chosen deliberately, placed precisely at a specific point on the globe. And that point, when expressed in degrees, matches the speed of light when expressed in meters per second. Could this be pure chance? Possibly. The universe contains infinite numbers, and with enough searching, you can find patterns anywhere. But when one coincidence might be chance and two might be luck, at what point does the accumulation of mathematical precision demand explanation? The mathematical messages continue, growing stranger and more profound. Take the pyramid's height, 146.6 meters in its original form, before the capstone was lost, and multiply it by 43,200. The result, 6,342,720 meters. That's almost exactly the polar radius of the Earth, 6,356,750 meters. The difference is less than 0.5%. Now take the perimeter of the pyramid's base, 921.6 meters, and multiply it by the same number, 43,200. You get 39,895,680 meters. The Earth's equatorial circumference is 40,075,000 meters. Again, less than 0.5% difference. The number 43,200 isn't random. It's a fundamental harmonic of Earth's rotation. There are 86,400 seconds in a day, 24 hours times 60 minutes times 60 seconds. Half of that is 43,200, a number that appears in ancient timekeeping systems across multiple cultures. The pyramid, in effect, is a scale model of the planet with a scale factor of 1:43,200. But to create such a model, the builders would need to know the exact size and shape of the Earth. They would need to understand that the planet is an oblate spheroid, slightly wider at the equator than at the poles. They would need sophisticated surveying techniques capable of measuring planetary dimensions. Orthodox history tells us this knowledge didn't exist until the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference around 240 BC, using shadows and geometry. Yet the pyramid, built at least 2,000 years earlier, and possibly much more, already encodes these measurements with startling accuracy. The final layer of encoded mathematics reaches beyond Earth to the heavens themselves. The pyramid's base angle, the slope of its faces, is approximately 51 degrees and 50 minutes. This isn't arbitrary. It's the precise angle that creates the pi and phi relationships we've already discussed. But there's another significance. The angle closely matches Earth's axial tilt relative to the plane of its orbit around the Sun, approximately 23.4 degrees. The pyramid's design angle creates a slope that, when doubled, nearly equals the Earth's wobble. Even more remarkably, the pyramid's dimensions encode the precession of the equinoxes, the 25,920-year cycle during which Earth's rotational axis slowly traces a circle in the sky, changing which star serves as the North Star over millennia. Ancient cultures across the world recognized this cycle, calling it the Great Year. The Mayans calculated it with impressive accuracy. Hindu texts describe it as the cycle of the Yugas. The Egyptians tracked it through their astronomical observations. But the Great Pyramid doesn't just acknowledge precession, it embeds it in stone. Various measurements throughout the structure, when multiplied by specific constants, yield numbers related to the precessional cycle. It's as if the builders were creating a three-dimensional textbook of astronomy, geodesy, and mathematics, disguised as a monument. Why would they do this? Why encode so much knowledge in a structure that appears, on the surface, to be nothing more than a tomb? The answer may be uncomfortable. Perhaps because they knew their civilization wouldn't last. Perhaps because they understood that catastrophe was coming, whether through climate change, cosmic impact, or cultural collapse. And they wanted to preserve essential knowledge in the only medium that could survive: stone. The Great Pyramid in this interpretation isn't a tomb. It's a time capsule. A message from the past to the future, written in the only language guaranteed to survive: mathematics. And if that's true, then we haven't been studying a grave. We've been standing inside a library, unable to read the books because we've been looking for words instead of numbers. There are nights in the desert when the stars seem close enough to touch, when the Milky Way pours across the darkness like a river of light, and the heavens feel less like a void and more like a ceiling, vast, eternal, inscribed with meanings we've forgotten how to read. The ancient Egyptians didn't see the sky as empty space. To them it was the Duat, the realm of the gods, a mirror of the earthly world, where divine order played out in celestial choreography. Death was not an ending but a crossing, a journey from the land of the living to the land of the eternal, guided by the stars. And nowhere was this cosmology more literally embodied than at Giza. In 1993, an engineer and independent researcher named Robert Bauval made an observation that would transform how we understand the pyramid complex. He was studying aerial photographs of the Giza Plateau when something caught his eye, something so obvious that its absence from academic discussion seemed almost willful. The three pyramids weren't arranged in a straight line. Khufu's pyramid, the largest, sits to the northeast. Khafar's, slightly smaller, stands to the southwest. And Menkaur's, the smallest, is offset slightly to the east, breaking the diagonal pattern established by the first two. At first glance, this seems like a minor detail, perhaps a quirk of terrain or construction logistics. But when Bauval looked at a star chart of Orion's belt, the three stars that form the hunter's waist in the constellation Orion, he saw the same pattern. Alnitak, the brightest star, corresponds to the largest pyramid. Alnilam, the middle star, aligns with Khafar's pyramid. And Mintaka, the smallest and slightly offset to the east, matches Menkaur's position exactly. The pyramids of Giza are a terrestrial map of Orion's belt, built to perfect scale, oriented to the same celestial coordinates. Bauval didn't stop with the spatial correlation. He asked a more profound question. When did the pyramids and the stars align most perfectly? The answer required understanding precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes the apparent position of the stars over thousands of years. Because of precession, the night sky visible to the ancient Egyptians was subtly different from ours. Stars that now appear in one position would have been higher or lower in the sky 4,000 years ago. Using astronomical software, Bovell calculated the position of Orion's belt across millennia. He found that around 2500 BC, Khufu's supposed era, the correlation between the pyramids and the stars was good, but not perfect. But when he rewound the clock further, something remarkable happened. Around 10,500 BC, at the end of the last ice age, Orion's belt reached its lowest point in the precessional cycle. At that moment, the stars aligned with the pyramids with almost perfect precision. The angle, the spacing, the relative brightness, everything matched. 10,500 BC. Not 2,500 BC. That's 8,000 years earlier than the accepted timeline. It's before agriculture, before cities, before writing. It's in the heart of the Younger Dryas, the period of global climate upheaval that saw massive flooding, the extinction of megafauna, and the possible collapse of advanced cultures whose names we've lost. Mainstream Egyptologists dismissed Bovell's theory as pseudoscience, coincidence, and imaginative overreach. But the numbers are difficult to ignore. Either the pyramid builders were commemorating a sky they had never seen, a sky that existed 8,000 years before their time, or they were recording the sky they actually witnessed. And if the latter is true, then the pyramids are far, far older than we've been told. The celestial correlation deepens when you consider the surrounding landscape. The Nile River, flowing north past Giza, mirrors the Milky Way's path across the sky. In Egyptian cosmology, the Milky Way was called the Winding Waterway, or the River of Stars, a celestial Nile where the souls of the dead sailed on their journey to the afterlife. If you overlay a star chart of the night sky around 10,500 BC onto a map of the Giza Plateau and the Nile, the correlation is striking. The river's curve matches the Milky Way's arc. The pyramids mark Orion's position. Other nearby structures correspond to other significant stars and constellations. This wasn't decoration. It was theology made geography, a literal as above, so below written into the landscape itself. The Egyptians themselves spoke of this principle. In the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in human history, carved into the walls of later pyramids, the pharaoh is described as ascending to Orion after death, becoming one with the god Osiris, whose constellation eternally rises and sets in the southern sky. The king goes to the sky, the texts say. He goes to Orion. He ascends on the rays of the sun. If this was merely metaphor, why build the pyramids in perfect correlation to the stars? Why orient the shafts inside the king's chamber towards specific celestial targets? Why encode the precessional cycle into the structure's mathematics? Unless the purpose was never burial. Unless the pyramids were meant to function as a kind of spiritual technology, a machine for ascension, aligning the soul of the king with the cosmos itself. The pyramid, in effect, is a map and a machine. Its architecture creates permanent connections between the earthly realm and specific points in the heavens, as if forging pathways through which something, a soul, energy, information, could travel between worlds. This wasn't symbolic architecture. The precision of these shafts suggests they served a specific function, one we may not fully understand. The angles are exact, calculated to fractions of a degree. The shafts maintain their trajectories through dozens of meters of solid stone, never deviating, never wavering. To drill such passages without modern equipment would be extraordinarily difficult. You cannot see through stone to know if your angle is correct. You cannot measure the alignment from inside while you're working. Yet somehow, the ancient builders, or whoever the true builders were, created these shafts with the precision of a laser sight, aimed at stars hundreds of light years away. When the French engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot crawler up the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber in 1993, it discovered something unexpected at the shaft's end. A small limestone door with copper fittings. The door wasn't solid, metal pins protruded through it, suggesting something lay beyond. When the Egyptian authorities finally permitted drilling through the door in 2002, they found another small chamber and another door. Behind that door? The mystery remains officially unexplored, though whispers persist of additional chambers, of spaces the public has never seen. What were these hidden compartments for? What was meant to travel through these shafts, aimed like arrows at the stars? Perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. Perhaps the shafts weren't meant for anything to travel outward. Perhaps they were designed to channel something inward, starlight, cosmic radiation, some force or frequency we don't yet recognize, focusing it into the chambers below like a lens concentrating sunlight into a burning point. There's one more celestial alignment that refuses to be dismissed, one that further supports the 10,500 BC date that Bauval's Orion correlation suggests. When Orion's belt reached its lowest point in the precessional cycle around 10,500 BC, another constellation was rising directly in the east at the spring equinox, Leo the Lion. And what sits beside the pyramids, facing due east, carved from a single outcropping of limestone bedrock? The Sphinx. A lion's body with a human head. The correlation is too precise to ignore. Around 10,500 BC, the sun rose in the constellation Leo at the spring equinox. The Sphinx, facing east toward the rising sun, would have been gazing directly at its celestial counterpart, a lion looking at a lion across the threshold of earth and sky. Geologist Robert Schoch's water erosion analysis of the Sphinx enclosure, which we touched on earlier, dates the weathering to a period of heavy rainfall between 10,000 and 5000 BC. That time frame aligns perfectly with Bauval's astronomical dating. Both lines of evidence, geological and astronomical, point to the same conclusion. The Sphinx and possibly the pyramids were built during the age of Leo, when the Sahara was still green and the world was emerging from the Ice Age. Mainstream Egyptologists resist this conclusion because it would require rewriting not just Egyptian history, but the entire timeline of human civilization. If people were building monuments of this sophistication 12,000 years ago, then the story of humanity's rise, from hunter-gatherers to farmers to city builders, needs to be fundamentally reconsidered. But the stars don't care about our academic models. They simply mark time, patient and precise, waiting for us to look up and read what's been written there all along. The Great Pyramid and the Sphinx aren't just monuments. They're calendars recording a specific moment in cosmic time. A moment when the Earth's axis pointed in a particular direction, when certain stars rose at certain angles, when a civilization looked up at the heavens and said, "We were here. We understood this. Remember us." And they encoded that moment not in words that could be mistranslated or forgotten, but in stone and stars, in angles and alignments, in a language that speaks to anyone willing to look closely enough. The message is simple: we knew the sky, we knew the earth, we knew how they connected. And when catastrophe came, as it always does, we built something that would survive, something that would whisper across the millennia, "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." Step inside the king's chamber and the first thing you notice is the silence. Not the absence of sound, but its presence. A heavy, pressing quiet that seems to fill the space like water filling a tank. The granite walls absorb your voice, flatten it, reshape it into something strange and distant. There are no hieroglyphs here. No paintings depicting the journey to the afterlife. No religious texts promising resurrection. The walls are bare stone, smooth and dark, reflecting nothing. Even the light seems muted, as if reluctant to illuminate what this chamber truly is. At the western end sits a rectangular granite box, lidless and hollow. This is what Egyptologists call the sarcophagus, the coffin where Khufu's mummified body supposedly rested for eternity. But no body has ever been found here. No fragments of wood from an inner coffin. No resin from embalming. No gold leaf, no amulets, no Shabti figures to serve the king in the afterlife. Not even the residue of oils or perfumes used in burial rites. The chamber is as empty as it was the day it was sealed, or perhaps as empty as it was always meant to be. The granite box itself is an engineering mystery. It measures approximately 2.3 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 1 meter deep. Its interior was hollowed out with precision that modern stone carvers struggle to replicate. The walls are flat to within a millimeter across their entire surface. The corners meet at perfect right angles. The interior surfaces show no chisel marks, no tool scars, only smooth, almost polished granite. Creating such a piece requires removing tons of stone from a solid block, hollowing it out while maintaining perfect geometric precision. With modern diamond-tipped saws and computer-guided equipment, this is challenging but possible. With Bronze Age copper tools? The task borders on impossible. But here's what makes the box even stranger. It's too large to fit through the passages leading to the king's chamber. The ascending corridor and the grand gallery are both narrower than the box's dimensions. There's no way it could have been brought into the chamber after construction. That means the box had to be placed during construction, before the chamber was roofed and sealed. It was installed not as an afterthought, but as an integral part of the pyramid's original design. But if it was meant to hold Khufu's body, why install it centuries or millennia before he was born? Why build the entire pyramid around an empty box? Unless, of course, it was never meant to hold a body at all. When acoustician Tom Danley brought sensitive recording equipment into the king's chamber in 1998, he discovered something that no tourist guide mentions and few Egyptologists acknowledge. The chamber resonates. At specific frequencies, particularly around 110 to 120 Hz, the granite walls begin to vibrate audibly. The resonance isn't chaotic or random. It's structured, harmonic, like the sound of a perfectly tuned musical instrument. At 432 Hz, something even more remarkable happens. That frequency, often called the natural tuning or earth frequency, causes the entire chamber to hum in sympathetic vibration. Stand in the center and you can feel it in your chest, in your bones, as if the stone itself is breathing. This isn't coincidence. The dimensions of the chamber, 10 cubits wide, 20 cubits long, 11 cubits high, create a perfect double square rectangle, a geometric form known for its acoustic properties. When sound waves bounce between walls of these proportions, they create standing waves, patterns of vibration that amplify specific frequencies while canceling others. The ancient Greek mathematician Pythagoras studied these ratios and declared them sacred, the mathematical foundation of musical harmony. Temples across the ancient world, from Egypt to Greece to India, were designed using similar proportions, creating spaces where sound behaved in particular ways. But the Great Pyramid wasn't a temple where priests sang hymns. At least that's not what the textbooks tell us. So why design a burial chamber to resonate at Earth's natural frequency? Unless it wasn't a burial chamber. Unless it was something else entirely, a resonance chamber, a space designed to amplify and focus vibration for purposes we're only beginning to understand. The choice of materials becomes even more significant when you understand their properties. The King's Chamber is constructed entirely of granite from Aswan, 800 kilometers away. Every wall, every ceiling beam, every surface, all granite. This is in stark contrast to the rest of the pyramid, which is primarily limestone. Why haul the hardest, heaviest stone available across half of Egypt when local limestone would have been far easier to work with? The answer may lie in granite's composition. Aswan granite contains high concentrations of quartz crystal and feldspar, minerals with piezoelectric properties. When subjected to pressure or vibration, these crystals generate tiny electrical charges. Individually, these charges are microscopic, barely measurable. But when you have a chamber constructed of hundreds of tons of granite, all vibrating in harmony, the cumulative effect could be significant. Some researchers have theorized that the Great Pyramid functioned as a kind of resonant energy device, converting mechanical vibration from sound, seismic activity, or other sources, into electrical charge through piezoelectric action. The granite chambers act as transducers, the Grand Gallery as an acoustic resonator, and the entire structure as a massive harmonic oscillator. This isn't pseudoscience. The physics is well established. Modern ultrasonic cutting tools use the same principle. Vibration converted to energy focused through crystalline material. The question is whether the pyramid's builders understood these principles and deliberately designed a structure to harness them. In 2018, physicists at ITMO University in St. Petersburg published a study in the Journal of Applied Physics that sent ripples through both the scientific and alternative research communities. Using electromagnetic modeling software, they simulated how the Great Pyramid would interact with radio waves. What they found was unexpected. At certain frequencies, particularly in the radio and microwave range, the pyramid's internal chambers and the area beneath its foundation concentrate electromagnetic energy. The study wasn't looking for ancient power plants or mystical technology. The researchers were simply investigating how architectural structures interact with electromagnetic fields. But their findings showed that the pyramid's geometry, its shape, dimensions, and internal architecture, creates a resonant cavity capable of focusing and amplifying electromagnetic energy. If combined with the piezoelectric properties of the granite and the acoustic resonance of the chambers, the pyramid begins to look less like a tomb and more like a device. A massive stone instrument designed to interact with forces we're only now learning to measure and understand. Could this explain the absence of soot? If the pyramid's chambers were illuminated not by fire but by some form of energy generation, piezoelectric glow, electromagnetic discharge, or phenomena we don't yet understand, there would be no carbon residue, no blackened ceilings, no trace of torches or lamps. The chamber would be lit by its own resonance, glowing faintly in the darkness like crystal under pressure, powered by the earth itself. This isn't proof. The evidence remains circumstantial, suggestive rather than conclusive. But it offers an explanation that makes more sense than the traditional narrative. Why would you build the most precisely engineered structure in the ancient world, using the hardest materials available, transported from impossible distances, shaped with impossible precision, and install it all around an empty box in a chamber designed to resonate at specific frequencies, just to bury one man? The answer is you wouldn't. You'd build such a structure only if it served a function beyond burial. A function that required precision, specific materials, acoustic properties, and electromagnetic characteristics. The Great Pyramid wasn't built to house the dead. It was built to do something, to generate, to focus, to resonate, to transform. What exactly it was meant to do remains one of history's deepest mysteries. But the empty throne in its heart suggests we've been asking the wrong questions for far too long. Imagine working in total darkness hundreds of meters inside a mountain of stone, carving granite with precision that would challenge modern tools. The weight of millions of tons presses down from above. The air is close, still, heavy with the dust of stone. How do you see? The conventional answer is simple: torches, oil lamps, or mirrors reflecting sunlight down narrow passages. But here's the problem. None of these methods leave any trace inside the Great Pyramid. The ceilings are pristine. No soot stains. No carbon deposits. No blackened patches where smoke accumulated over years of construction. Microscopic analysis of the limestone and granite surfaces reveals no combustion byproducts whatsoever. No unburned hydrocarbons, no ash particles, no residue from oil or animal fat. Compare this to literally every other ancient structure where artificial light was used. The tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings shows clear soot patterns on its ceiling. The temples at Abu Simbel bear torch marks in their deepest chambers. Medieval cathedrals still carry the stains of centuries of candlelight. Even modern churches, with their clean-burning candles and careful ventilation, accumulate carbon residue over time. It's inevitable, unavoidable, the price of illumination in enclosed spaces. Yet the Great Pyramid, supposedly built over 20 years by thousands of workers who would have needed constant light to see their work, shows no evidence that fire ever burned within its chambers. How is this possible? The standard explanation, repeated in textbooks and documentaries, is the mirror system: polished bronze or copper mirrors reflecting sunlight from the entrance through the passages and into the interior chambers. It sounds plausible until you test it. Light obeys specific physical laws. When it reflects off a surface, even a highly polished one, some energy is lost. The best mirrors available in Bronze Age Egypt, polished bronze or copper, reflect approximately 40 to 50% of incident light. Each subsequent reflection loses more energy. By the fourth or fifth reflection, the light is so diminished that it's barely visible to the human eye. By the 10th reflection, it's effectively gone. The king's chamber sits 43 meters above ground level, at the end of a corridor that bends, turns, and changes height multiple times. To illuminate it with sunlight would require dozens of mirrors, each perfectly positioned and constantly adjusted as the sun moved across the sky. In 2016, physicist Dr. John Blair at Oxford recreated this system at scale using the best available replica mirrors. His team found that by the time reflected sunlight reached the equivalent of the king's chamber, less than 3% of the original light remained, a faint glow barely sufficient to see your hand in front of your face, much less perform precision stone carving. Moreover, the system would only work for a few hours each day when the sun was at the correct angle. Dawn, dusk, and cloudy days would halt all interior work. And during construction, when the passages were still being built and sealed, even this limited system wouldn't function. The mirror theory sounds good on paper. In practice it fails. 400 kilometers south of Giza, in the temple complex at Dendera, there's a relief carved into the crypt walls that has puzzled archaeologists for more than a century. It depicts what appears to be elongated bulbs or tubes, each containing a serpent-like form. The bulbs sit on pillars and are connected by braided cables to box-like objects. Priests stand on either side, holding the bulbs as if manipulating them. Orthodox Egyptologists interpret this as symbolic. The serpent representing creative energy, the bulb as a lotus flower, the entire scene a mythological representation of divine power. But electrical engineers looking at the same relief see something different. They see components: insulators, conductors, power sources, and what looks remarkably like primitive discharge tubes, glass bulbs filled with gas that glow when electrical current passes through them. In the 1970s, engineer Eric von Daniken, controversial as his theories may be, built a working model based on the Dendera relief. Using materials available in ancient times, copper wire, ceramic insulators, zinc and copper electrodes immersed in acidic solution, he created a battery that produced electrical current. When connected to a sealed tube containing low-pressure gas, the system produced a faint glow similar to a fluorescent light. The experiment wasn't conclusive proof of ancient electricity, but it demonstrated that such technology was theoretically possible using Bronze Age materials. More intriguingly, chemical analysis of the Dendra crypt has revealed residues of zinc, copper salts, and sulfuric compounds, the exact materials you'd expect to find if galvanic batteries had been used there. Could the ancient Egyptians have understood electrical principles that we assume were discovered only in the 18th century? Could they have possessed lighting technology that didn't require fire? Let's return to the Great Pyramid with this possibility in mind. The structure's core consists of massive granite blocks rich in quartz crystal, a natural semiconductor with piezoelectric properties. These blocks are wrapped in an outer casing of limestone, an excellent electrical insulator when dry. In electrical engineering, this combination, a conductive core wrapped in an insulating shell, is precisely how you build a capacitor, a device that stores electrical charge. Beneath the pyramid, geological surveys have revealed the presence of underground water channels and aquifers. Water flowing through the porous limestone would create a natural electrolytic solution, especially given the mineral content of Nile River water. Some researchers have proposed that the pyramid functioned as a massive power generator, using a combination of piezoelectric effects from the granite, chemical reactions from underground water, and acoustic vibration amplified by the internal chambers to generate electrical current. Engineer Christopher Dunn developed this theory extensively in his book, The Giza Power Plant, arguing that the pyramid was designed to convert vibrational energy into microwave radiation that could then be transmitted or stored. Is he right? The theory remains controversial, largely untestable without invasive investigation that Egyptian authorities will never permit. But it offers an explanation for mysteries that the tomb theory simply cannot address. The choice of materials, the precision of construction, the resonant properties, the absence of soot, the enormous investment of resources. If the pyramid was a power device, even one we don't fully understand, then its design makes sense. Every feature serves a function. The mathematics isn't decorative, it's operational. The structure isn't a monument, it's a machine. There's one more possibility, stranger and harder to prove, but worth considering. Multiple visitors to the king's chamber, particularly those who spend extended time in meditation or silence within its walls, report visual phenomena. Flashes of light at the periphery of vision. A faint luminescence from the granite walls. Geometric patterns that seem to shimmer in the air. Skeptics dismiss these as hallucinations, products of sensory deprivation or the mind's tendency to create patterns in darkness. But infrared cameras have detected unusual heat signatures in the chamber. Points where the granite is slightly warmer than surrounding stone, with no apparent external heat source. Could the granite itself be generating faint light through piezoelectric discharge? When quartz crystal is compressed, it releases electrons, creating tiny sparks, triboluminescence, the same effect that makes quartz rocks glow when struck together in the dark. The pyramid's immense weight, constantly pressing down on the granite blocks, combined with seismic vibrations from the Earth's movements and acoustic resonance from the chamber's geometry, could theoretically generate continuous low-level electrical discharge. This wouldn't produce bright light, certainly not enough to work by, but it might create a dim glow, a luminescence barely visible to dark-adapted eyes, sufficient perhaps for priests or initiates who spent hours or days inside the chamber, waiting for their vision to adjust. In total darkness, the human eye can detect surprisingly faint light sources. Given time, you could work by starlight or by the faint glow of phosphorescence, or by light so subtle it seems to come from the stones themselves. The pyramid may not have needed torches or mirrors. It may have provided its own illumination, powered by the Earth's vibrations and the unique properties of its materials, glowing faintly from within like a stone that remembers what light is. And if that's true, then the builders understood something we've forgotten. That stone isn't dead, that the Earth itself is alive with energy, and that with the right design, with the right materials and the right geometry, you can make even granite sing and shine. History has a way of being rewritten by those who come after, not always with malice, but with the simple human desire to be remembered. In temples across Egypt, from Karnak to Luxor, from Abu Simbel to the Valley of the Kings, you can see this rewriting everywhere if you know where to look. Cartouches carved over earlier cartouches. Names chiseled away and replaced. Entire walls recarved to glorify a later pharaoh who claimed credit for buildings his predecessors constructed. The Egyptians called this practice usurpation, though to them it wasn't theft, it was continuity, a way of maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order. When a pharaoh claimed an earlier king's monument, he wasn't stealing glory, he was absorbing it, becoming part of an eternal lineage that stretched back to the gods themselves. But for historians trying to untangle who built what and when, usurpation creates enormous problems. How do you know if the name on a monument belongs to its builder or to someone who merely claimed it centuries later? Nowhere is this question more important than at Giza. Let's look at one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs, Ramesses II, called Ramesses the Great, the king who reigned for 66 years during the 19th dynasty, roughly 1,200 years after the Great Pyramid was supposedly built. Ramesses is everywhere in Egypt. His name appears on more monuments, statues, and temples than any other pharaoh. He commissioned Abu Simbel, expanded Karnak, built the Ramesseum, and left his cartouche from the Nile Delta to Nubia. He was, the monuments tell us, the greatest builder Egypt ever knew. Except he wasn't. Modern archaeology has revealed that Ramesses was as much an appropriator as a builder. At Luxor Temple, his cartouches sit atop those of Amenhotep III, who built the structure 150 years earlier. At Abydos, Ramesses carved his name over reliefs created by his own father, Seti I. Even the great statues at Abu Simbel show signs of modification. The faces recarved, the inscriptions added over older, half-erased hieroglyphs. Ramesses didn't just build monuments. He claimed them, renaming and rebranding structures that had stood for centuries, embedding his identity into Egypt's landscape so thoroughly that later generations would remember only him. If usurpation was standard practice during the New Kingdom, 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid's supposed construction, how much more common might it have been in earlier eras? And how would we know the difference? Return to Giza and the absence becomes striking. Outside of Vice questionable painted cartouches inside the relieving chambers, there is not a single inscription anywhere on or in the Great Pyramid that names Khufu as its builder. No hieroglyphs carved into the facing stones. No temple reliefs showing Khufu overseeing construction. No workers' graffiti celebrating their king. No commemorative text describing the building process. No statues of Khufu standing triumphantly beside his completed monument. The smaller pyramids at Giza, those attributed to Khufu's successors, do contain inscriptions. Khufu's pyramid complex includes temples with carved reliefs and statues. Menkaur's pyramid has hieroglyphic texts. Even the step pyramid at Saqqara, supposedly built before Giza, contains extensive inscriptions identifying its owner. But the largest, oldest, and most sophisticated pyramid in Egypt bears no name. That's not how pharaohs operated. Egyptian kings were obsessed with immortality, with ensuring their names lived forever. They carved their cartouches everywhere, on obelisks, on temple walls, on statues, on anything that might survive into eternity. The idea that Khufu would build humanity's largest monument and then fail to sign it anywhere is profoundly unlikely. Unless, of course, he didn't build it. Unless he found it already standing, already ancient, a relic from an age whose builders had vanished without leaving names. There's another kind of Egyptian inscription that offers clues. Restoration texts, records carved by later pharaohs describing their efforts to repair and maintain ancient monuments. One of the most famous is the Dream Stele, erected by Thutmose IV 18th dynasty, around 1400 BC, between the paws of the Sphinx. The text describes how Thutmose, as a young prince, fell asleep in the Sphinx's shadow during a hunting trip. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him, asking to be freed from the sand that had buried it. The inscription doesn't claim Thutmose built the Sphinx. It describes him rediscovering it, clearing away centuries of accumulated sand, and restoring the monument to visibility. He calls the Sphinx Khafre Ra, the becoming of Ra, and refers to it as ancient already in his time, built since the time of the followers of Horus. Who were the followers of Horus? In Egyptian mythology, they were the semi-divine rulers who governed Egypt after the gods departed but before mortal pharaohs came to power. They belonged to Zep Tepi, the first time, an epic so distant that even the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom considered it mythological. If the Sphinx was built during the first time, and if Thutmose was merely restoring it in 1400 BC, then its construction predates not just Khufu but the entire historical period of Egyptian civilization. Other restoration texts tell similar stories. Khamwezet, son of Ramesses II, earned fame as an archaeologist prince who restored ancient monuments. His inscriptions describe finding structures already ruined and forgotten, their original builders unknown, their purposes lost to memory. What if the Great Pyramid fell into that same category? What if Khufu's contribution wasn't construction but restoration, clearing, repairing, perhaps building the mortuary temple and causeway, and then claiming the monument as his own, as was customary for pharaohs restoring ancient works? Egyptian theology speaks of an age before history began, when the gods walked on earth and established the principles of civilization. This was Zep Tepi, the first time, when Osiris, Isis, Thoth, and Horus ruled directly over humanity, teaching astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and divine law. To the ancient Egyptians, Zep Tepi wasn't metaphor. It was history, distant, fragmentary, half-remembered, but real. The priests at Heliopolis maintained extensive records of this earlier age, though most have been lost or destroyed over millennia. When Plato visited Egypt in the 4th century BC, priests told him that their civilization was far older than Greece realized. They spoke of events 9,000 years in the past, catastrophes, floods, the rise and fall of kingdoms that left no trace except in memory and myth. The historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, compiled Egyptian king lists that included not just historical pharaohs but divine rulers who reigned for thousands of years before recorded history began. Modern scholars dismiss these as mythology, but to Manetho, they were chronicles of real events, preserved through oral tradition and sacred texts. What if the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx are remnants of Zep Tepi, built by those semi-divine rulers whose mastery of stone and mathematics was later attributed to gods because no mortal seemed capable of such achievements? In this reading, the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom didn't build Giza. They inherited it. They found monuments already ancient, already weathered, already mysterious. And like Ramesses claiming Abu Simbel or Thutmose claiming the Sphinx, they restored, modified, and rebranded these structures as their own. Khufu became associated with the Great Pyramid not because he built it, but because he restored it, perhaps adding the mortuary temple, the causeway, or internal chambers, and inserting his name into the structure through those controversial painted hieroglyphs that Weiss may later have forged or refreshed. The pyramid's true builders left no names because they predated the invention of writing itself. They spoke in the only language that survives all ages: geometry, mathematics, and stone. And perhaps that's the most profound usurpation of all, not one pharaoh claiming another's work, but an entire civilization claiming credit for monuments built by a world that existed before civilization itself began. There's a peculiar feeling that comes with walking across the Giza Plateau in the quiet hours, when the tourists have departed and the lights have dimmed. Your footsteps sound hollow, as if you're walking not on solid ground but on something hollow, something that echoes. And perhaps you are. In 2015, a team of physicists and engineers from universities in Japan, France, and Egypt launched the Scan Pyramids project, an ambitious effort to peer inside the pyramids using non-invasive technology. Instead of drilling or excavating, they deployed muon tomography, a technique that detects cosmic ray particles raining down from space. Muons pass through rock and stone but leave subtle signatures that can be measured. By placing detectors inside and around the pyramids and analyzing how many muons pass through versus how many are absorbed, scientists can create three-dimensional maps of density variations, essentially X-raying entire structures with cosmic rays. The results, published in Nature in 2017, shocked the archaeological community. There was a void, a large one, hidden above the Grand Gallery, extending at least 30 meters into the pyramid's core, empty space where there should have been solid stone. The discovery raised immediate questions. Was this a deliberate chamber sealed since construction? A structural space to relieve pressure? Or something else entirely? A corridor, a passage, a hidden room containing artifacts or inscriptions that could rewrite everything we think we know about the pyramid's purpose and age? Egyptian authorities responded with caution bordering on resistance. No drilling. No invasive exploration. The void remains unexamined, its contents unknown, its purpose mysterious. But the discovery confirmed something researchers had long suspected. The Great Pyramid is not solid. It's riddled with spaces, passages, and chambers we've never seen. And if there's one major void we didn't know about until 2015, how many others remain undiscovered? In 2023, the Scan Pyramids team announced another find, this time using ground-penetrating radar and endoscopic cameras inserted through tiny holes drilled into the pyramid's northern face. Behind the entrance, hidden within the masonry, lies a corridor approximately 9 meters long and 2 meters wide. It's narrow, seemingly empty, and oriented in a direction that doesn't correspond to any known internal structure. Where does it lead? What was its purpose? The cameras captured smooth limestone walls, unmarked and pristine, but the corridor ends at another sealed area, potentially another chamber or intersection with other passages. The discovery validates what alternative researchers have argued for decades, that the pyramid's known chambers, the King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber, Grand Gallery, and Subterranean Chamber, are likely only a fraction of the total internal architecture. The pyramid, in this view, is less a solid structure with a few rooms and more a three-dimensional labyrinth, its passages and chambers sealed, hidden, or simply never discovered. And it's not just the pyramid. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the plateau itself have revealed linear anomalies beneath the sand, patterns that don't match natural geology, that form grid-like structures extending away from the pyramids toward the Sphinx and beyond. Descend below the surface of the Giza Plateau, into the spaces that tourists never see, and a different architecture reveals itself. The subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, carved into the bedrock more than 30 meters below the base, is officially described as unfinished, a rough cavity that the builders abandoned for unknown reasons. But rough is a relative term. The chamber is enormous, big enough to hold dozens of people. Its floor is uneven, its walls scarred with what look like tool marks. A narrow passage extends from one corner, descending even deeper into the bedrock before terminating at a blank wall. Why carve so far underground only to stop? And if this chamber predates the pyramid above it, if it was already there when the pyramid was built, then who made it and when? In the 1990s, Egyptian authorities sealed several passages branching from the subterranean chamber after explorers reported that they extended far beyond the pyramid's footprint, continuing into the plateau in directions that have never been officially mapped. There are whispers, unconfirmed, of explorers who ventured into those passages and found not dead ends but intersections, junctions where tunnels meet, branching in multiple directions like an underground network. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, described just such a network. He spoke of passages extending from the pyramid to a subterranean lake where, he was told, the true body of Khufu rested on an island in the dark. Modern science has confirmed that water exists beneath the Giza Plateau, ancient groundwater trapped in porous limestone layers. But the idea of a subterranean lake sounded like myth until geological surveys using electromagnetic tomography detected large void spaces filled with moisture deep below the surface. Is there a lake beneath Giza? And if so, could there be architecture surrounding it? Chambers, temples, or tombs built by people who understood that water preserves, that darkness protects, that the deepest secrets must be hidden below? Shift your attention from the pyramids to their silent companion, the Sphinx, crouched on the eastern edge of the plateau, gazing eternally toward the rising sun. In 1992, geophysicist Thomas DeBakey and archaeologist John Anthony West conducted seismic refraction studies around the Sphinx enclosure. They sent sound waves into the ground and measured how they bounced back, revealing density variations beneath the surface. What they found was unexpected: a large rectangular cavity beneath the Sphinx's left paw, extending down several meters into the bedrock. The void was too geometrically precise to be a natural formation. It showed clear right angles and flat surfaces consistent with artificial construction. When they attempted to conduct further investigation, including exploratory drilling to determine the chamber's extent and contents, Egyptian authorities abruptly halted the project. No explanation was given. No permission for follow-up studies was granted. The data was noted, filed away, and the matter was officially closed. But the cavity remains. Ground-penetrating radar conducted by other teams in subsequent years has confirmed its presence. Whatever lies beneath the Sphinx's paw, a chamber, a passage, a tomb, a vault, it has been there for thousands of years, sealed and waiting. Edgar Cayce, the American mystic and psychic who died in 1945, famously predicted that a hall of records would be discovered beneath the Sphinx, containing archives from the lost civilization of Atlantis. Mainstream archaeology dismisses this as fantasy, and perhaps rightly so. But dismissing Cayce doesn't make the chamber disappear. The void is real. The geometry is artificial. And the Egyptian government's reluctance to investigate suggests that if something is down there, they prefer it to remain undiscovered, or at least unpublicized. Pull back and look at the Giza Plateau as a whole, not as a collection of individual monuments but as a unified complex, and patterns begin to emerge. The three pyramids align with Orion's belt, as we've discussed. But there are other structures. Smaller pyramids, mortuary temples, causeways connecting the pyramids to the Nile, and dozens of mastaba tombs belonging to nobles and officials. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted over the past 2 decades have revealed that these surface structures are connected by subsurface passages, tunnels running beneath the sand, linking pyramid to pyramid, temple to tomb, creating a network that was never meant to be visible from above. Some of these passages are known and documented. Others appear in radar scans but have never been excavated or officially acknowledged. The pattern suggests that the Giza complex was designed not as a cemetery where individual tombs happen to cluster, but as an integrated system where every structure played a role in a larger architectural and perhaps functional design. In 2018, seismic surveys near Princess Elizabeth Land, a region southeast of the main pyramids, revealed a massive void roughly the size of Manhattan, deep beneath the surface. The cavity is dry despite being surrounded by moisture-bearing rock. Its geometry, according to the geophysicist who discovered it, is angular and unnaturally smooth. The official explanation: geothermal heating created a steam pocket that hollowed out the space over millennia. But the geometry doesn't match natural erosion patterns. It looks, as one researcher described in private correspondence before the term was redacted from published papers, architectural. If that cavity is artificial, it would dwarf even the Great Pyramid in scale. What could it be? Quarry? A storage chamber? A temple buried before the sands covered it? Or something else entirely, a space built for purposes we cannot yet imagine by people whose capabilities we have drastically underestimated? The plateau isn't just dotted with monuments. It's hollow beneath, threaded with passages and chambers that were sealed intentionally, protected not by locks but by sand and stone and the slow accumulation of centuries. And perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the builders knew that the surface structures, the pyramids, the Sphinx, the temples, would draw attention, would be explored, claimed, and renamed by every civilization that followed. But the real archives, the true knowledge, the deepest secrets were placed below, where only those who understood the full design would know to look. The Giza Plateau may not be a cemetery at all. It may be a library, its books written not in words but in stone and space, its most important volumes stored in chambers we've only begun to glimpse, waiting for a time when humanity is ready, or desperate enough, to read them. 12,800 years ago, something happened to the Earth. Something violent, sudden, and world-changing. The geological record marks this moment with startling clarity. A layer of sediment appearing across multiple continents, filled with microscopic diamonds, carbon spherules, platinum, and iridium, elements associated with cosmic impacts. The ice cores from Greenland show a spike in atmospheric dust and a sudden drop in temperature. This was the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid climate upheaval that lasted roughly 1,200 years. Temperatures plummeted. Ice sheets that had been slowly melting suddenly advanced again. And then, just as abruptly, the Ice Age ended. Glaciers collapsed. Sea levels rose by more than 120 meters in a matter of centuries, drowning coastlines and river valleys where human settlements had flourished. Whatever happened during those years reset the world. Megafauna, mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, went extinct across multiple continents almost simultaneously. Climate zones shifted. Ecosystems collapsed and reformed. And civilizations, if any existed at that level of organization, would have been swept away, their cities drowned beneath rising seas or buried under advancing ice. This isn't speculation. The evidence is written in stone, ice, and sediment layers that geologists can read as clearly as history books. What remains debated is only this: was there anyone there to witness it? Did humans, or proto-civilizations more advanced than hunter-gatherers, experience this cataclysm and somehow survive, carrying forward memories that would later be encoded in myth? Every ancient culture tells the story of a flood, a deluge so vast it drowned the world, sparing only a chosen few who survived to rebuild. The Sumerians told of Utnapishtim, who built an ark to survive the flood sent by the gods. The Hebrews told of Noah. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion. The Hindus described Manu, guided by a great fish to safety. The Mayans recounted how the gods destroyed previous worlds with water before creating the current age. From Mesopotamia to Mexico, from India to Iceland, the story repeats with eerie consistency. A time of great civilization, then catastrophe, then a handful of survivors who carried knowledge forward into a diminished world. Mainstream archaeology treats these as metaphors, poetic expressions of local flooding events, exaggerated through retelling until they became cosmic in scope. But what if their memory? Fragmented, mythologized, but memory nonetheless? Plato's account of Atlantis, told to him by Egyptian priests at Sais, dates the destruction of that civilization to approximately 9,600 BC, right in the window of the Younger Dryas catastrophe. The priests told Plato that Atlantis was a maritime empire, technologically advanced, that sank beneath the ocean, in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, scholars have searched for Atlantis in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, or dismissed it as Plato's philosophical invention. But what if the priests were describing a real event, the sudden drowning of coastal civilizations as sea levels rose catastrophically at the end of the Ice Age? The cities wouldn't be in the Mediterranean. They'd be hundreds of meters underwater, buried beneath silt and sand on continental shelves that were once dry land. And if such civilizations existed and were destroyed, what would survive? Not papyrus or wood or organic material. Only stone. Only the most massive, most durable structures, built on high ground or bedrock that rising seas couldn't reach. Structures like the Great Pyramid. Imagine you're a survivor of such a catastrophe. Your world, its cities, libraries, technologies, lies beneath the sea or crushed under advancing glaciers. Most of your people are dead. Those who remain have scattered, seeking high ground and stable land. You carry knowledge. Astronomy, mathematics, architecture, the principles of geometry and harmony that your ancestors spent millennia perfecting. But you have no way to record it. Writing, if it existed, is lost with the sunken cities. Even if you could write, on what would you inscribe it? How would you ensure it survives the next catastrophe, which you now know will come eventually? You would build in stone. Massive, permanent, impossible to destroy. You would encode your knowledge not in words that could be misread or forgotten, but in proportions, angles, alignments, mathematical relationships that any future civilization advanced enough to measure them would recognize. You would build a monument that serves as both archive and message. We were here. We knew these things. When you're ready to understand, the knowledge is waiting in the geometry itself. This is the thesis of the catastrophist school of alternative archaeology, that the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and perhaps similar monuments at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Nan Madol in Micronesia, and the submerged structures off the coasts of India and Japan are remnants of a pre-Younger Dryas civilization. These survivors didn't have time or resources to rebuild their lost world. But they could preserve fragments, enough to seed the next iteration of civilization, to give their descendants a head start when the world stabilized again. The Egyptians who emerged in the Nile Valley around 3100 BC found these structures already in place, weathered and ancient. They restored them, built around them, and incorporated them into their own mythology and religion, calling them gifts from the gods of the first time. There's a concept that appears in ancient traditions across the world. Cyclical time, the idea that history doesn't progress linearly but repeats in great circles. The Hindus describe it as the cycle of yugas, vast ages of rise and fall, creation and destruction, repeating endlessly. The Mayans tracked it in their long count calendar, marking epochs that last thousands of years before the world is destroyed and remade. The Egyptians encoded it in their concept of Zep Tepi and the eternal return of Osiris. Even modern science recognizes cycles. The 11-year solar cycle, the 26,000-year precessional cycle, the 100,000-year glacial cycles driven by variations in Earth's orbit. What if human civilization follows its own cycle, rising to heights we've now forgotten, collapsing when cosmic or geological events intervene, then rising again from the ashes? In this model, we're not the first technological civilization. We're just the latest iteration, building on foundations we don't recognize as artificial because they're so old they seem like natural geology. The pyramid wouldn't be anomalous. It would be one of the few survivors of the previous cycle, built to last precisely because its builders knew that most of what they created would be swept away. And if that's true, then we're not discovering ancient history. We're rediscovering our own prehistory, confronting the ruins of our own ancestors and refusing to recognize them because acknowledging them would mean admitting that civilization is fragile, that progress is temporary, and that everything we've built could vanish just as theirs did. The Great Pyramid stands today much as it has stood for thousands of years, weathered, stripped of its outer casing, surrounded by the sprawl of modern Cairo, but essentially unchanged. It doesn't speak. It doesn't explain itself. It simply waits, patient as only stone can be patient, for the moment when we're ready to ask the right questions and hear the answers hidden in its dimensions. Perhaps that moment is now. Perhaps as our own civilization faces climate change, resource depletion, and the possibility of catastrophic disruption, we're finally humble enough to consider that we might not be the first to reach this precipice. The pyramid's message, encoded in mathematics and astronomy, isn't about the past. It's about the future. It tells us, this has happened before. Civilizations rise and fall. But knowledge can survive if you build it to last. The Earth is a sphere. The stars move in predictable cycles. These constants remain even when everything else is swept away. If you understand this geometry, you have the tools to rebuild. Not just buildings, but understanding of your place in the cosmos, of the principles that govern matter and energy, of the harmony between earth and sky. The pyramid isn't a tomb. It's a seed planted by people who knew the winter was coming, who understood that their summer would end, but who wanted the next spring to have a better start than they did. And so it waits beneath the Egyptian sun, neither confirming nor denying the stories we tell about it, holding its secrets in perfect silence until we're wise enough, or desperate enough, to listen not with our assumptions but with our measurements, not with our narratives but with our mathematics. Because stone, unlike humans, doesn't lie. And the stone has been telling the truth all along. We've simply been speaking the wrong language. And so we return to where we began, standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid as night deepens around us, the ancient stone dark against a sky full of stars. We've journeyed through questionable evidence and impossible engineering, through mathematical constants and stellar alignments, through empty chambers that hum with Earth's frequency and hidden voids that may contain answers we're not yet ready to find. What have we discovered? Not certainty. The pyramid refuses to grant us that comfort. But questions. Better questions than the ones we started with. Not how did the Egyptians build this, but who built this and when and why. Not is this Khufu's tomb, but what function did this structure serve that required such precision, such scale, such permanent materials? Not how primitive were ancient people, but how much have we forgotten and what might we learn by remembering? The Great Pyramid stands as testament to a truth we're only beginning to accept, that the story of civilization is longer, stranger, and more cyclical than our textbooks admit, that knowledge can be lost as well as gained, that we may be rediscovering rather than discovering, and perhaps most humbling, that we are not necessarily the pinnacle of human achievement, but one chapter in a very long book, standing on foundations we didn't build, reading from an archive we're only now learning to access. The stone remains. The mathematics endure. The alignments point to moments in cosmic time that we can verify but not explain away. And beneath the sand, passages wait, chambers remain sealed, secrets rest in darkness until the moment when we're ready, truly ready, to confront what they might reveal. If you found value in this exploration, if it sparked questions or challenged assumptions you'd held without examining, I invite you to like this video. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who are also searching for deeper truths beneath the surface of accepted narratives. And please subscribe to Whispered Empires. This channel exists to excavate the forgotten, to question the comfortable, and to remind us that history is not settled. It's still being written, still being discovered, and often, still whispering from places we've been taught not to listen. Finally, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What ancient mystery do you believe we've misunderstood? What question about the Great Pyramid troubles you most? Or simply tell me, what time is it where you are right now and what drew you to this story tonight? Until we meet again, remember, the past is not behind us. It's beneath us, around us, encoded in stone and star, waiting for the moment when we stop telling stories and start listening to the ones that have been whispered across millennia. The pyramid was built by someone, for something, in service of knowledge we've barely begun to recover. And it waits still, patient as only stone can be, for the day when we're wise enough to understand not just how it was made, but why.